Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today we'll be taking a look at Dominique Grange and Jacques Tardi's book Elise and the New Partisans. This is part of Fantagraphics' ongoing series of Tardi translations, and I've been picking them up and working my way through them. This is the brand new one, so I had it pre-ordered. This book's interesting because the author is the artist's mother, and it's basically her story. But I think there's a veil of fiction over it. They're not using her name, at least, unless she changed her name. But it seems to be pretty grounded in accurate historical detail. A story about Tardi's mother being a singer-songwriter during the French Revolutionary movements of the 60s and 70s. So that's like the thrust of the book, is following her story. It's interesting though, because you don't really get that until the end of the book, and I'll talk about that more when we get there. So this starts in 1961, and you're basically getting some of the political details of Algerian men and women that are coming in as refugees into Paris, and like the political unrest that kicks off. And you start getting to know some of the actors in the situation as well. You can get a sense on this spread here of like the amount of effort that Tardis putting in. He's got one of these styles where any given figure or something is done in a very simple cartooning style with a very, like, I don't want to say clean line, because he does add some textures and details and line weight changes, but he's a very stripped down cartoonist, but then he will put in a lot of detail and mostly likes to focus on place and space and atmosphere. That's something I very much enjoy about his artwork. And you get a sense of that on this page here, where the time and the era and the place is very important to his artwork. We start to zoom in from the general details of the time to the specifics of the characters. And we meet here Elise, the title character of the book, and some of her friends, and we get to know some of the circumstances that they're involved in, the political activities and the things that are happening to them that draw them further into the movement of the revolution. Elise winds up becoming a pop star to some pretty big extent, is releasing pop music, does a duet with an already popular singer, and so gains some kind of notoriety with her music. You can see her first album here. But Elise is like less interested in using her music for wealth and gain and popularity, and gets caught up in the revolutionary movement. So we'll be doing things like here she's going to support a strike by showing up and playing a concert to keep the fighters going. So she's using her whatever amount of celebrity power she has to continue spurring on her belief set. So that's a really interesting thing in this. The other interesting thing that goes on in this book is as you go, you learn what her values are, and you see like where she's sticking to them, and you see where she gets challenged or where the values themselves fall apart a little bit. And that's a really interesting thing throughout the book. Here's the character Elise is enrolling in 1969, enrolling in sociology at the University of Vincennes. And this is where I start to like get interested in the philosophy of the book. I even think right here, this actually, now I'm just recognizing this might be a Michel Foucault portrait here. Not sure who these other two, they look like actually pretty specific people, but this looks like Foucault, and he definitely would have been involved in all of everything that was going on in this time. It seems like the sociology department in France would have been in 1969 would have been ground zero for everything that I really despise philosophically. So it's interesting for me reading this book to be reading something that's like very sympathetic and is representing being part of a movement that, I'm not saying the movement itself was bad, but a lot of the philosophy that was attached to it I find to be very, even though some of it's right about some things, their conclusions about what to do about their right conclusions I find detrimental. So it makes sense that this person is going in and getting an education like right in the heart of all of that. And I think this little comment here, I would have preferred the Sorbonne, is saying like that must have been where Derrida was teaching at the time. I'm not enough of a historian of that moment to know, but I know the characters in it and their thoughts. You can tell that she's really getting sucked into this kind of thinking when they're having this conversation here. And one of her friends is saying, recommending, Elise, you should read Mao's 5 philosophical essays to understand the importance of theory in the revolutionary praxis. And yeah, that's exactly the kind of bullshit that you would get if you were going to French sociology department in 1969, as you would be getting Maoist doctrination. And this word praxis here is one that anytime that came up in my art education, I knew I was talking to someone who had a training in literary theory or art theory, but they didn't have any training in philosophy, and so they were using bullshit words. Not that philosophy doesn't do that, but praxis is a particularly bullshit word that just means like putting your theory into practice. You could just say the revolutionary practice. And I've never been able to get anyone to explain to me why you wouldn't just use the word practice there. So yeah, theoreticians do that. They use baffle gab to obscure what they're saying. So it's funny to see that, because I hit the like, hey, I'm going to a sociology degree, and then immediately after that, the language of that kind of thing shows up. This is very saturated in accurate details about the time, down to the philosophy of what is driving these characters. One thing that I did appreciate about it is it starts to show, even though I think the book itself and the author herself still seems aligned with the values of the revolution, I think the book shows a pretty clear picture of the... I don't know if the book finds this to be inevitable, or if the authors just find this to be like the specific consequences of this moment in history. I think pretty obvious by how I talk about these things. I think this is kind of inevitable, but either way, they're showing some of the problems of how these ideals very quickly broke down. So you have French up, and they're like, hey, comrade, we heard that you've had your coworkers over for drinks at your home. Yeah, I tried to do that once, but it didn't happen due to my coworker Renee's accident. So what? Is there a problem? You're an operative in that factory to do political work, not have happy hours with the workers. So looking at how movements that are supposed to be about freedom and letting people do what they want and leaving people alone and taking power for yourself, often and inevitably, in my opinion, are going to wind up in any revolution is just going to put someone new in power, and it's always going to be a power game and a power grab. And so that's showing this, like the new police forces that come into play. I had to get a nice giggle and a laugh about the Elise here finding the world of comics and getting introduced to a lot of things that I've been getting introduced to lately. She's looking here through Charlie magazine, and definitely there's some Guido Crepa. I don't recognize the other artist right off the top of my head, but I feel like this is an artist I've been looking at. I feel like I've seen this stuff lately. So Elise here is looking at these magazines and starting to find that the world of comics is interesting, and is getting work translating comics. Another thing I found interesting about this, since I'm not like a historian, that's not my interest in life. I'm a philosopher by interest. So the historical details about this are interesting to me. And you see that there was a lot of protest from the far left of the French movement at the time, also supporting Palestine. And there's some talk about Zionist work and things like that. It's an interesting set of allies. I think a lot of people make that same comment now about the connection between the far left and the support for Palestine over Israel. To me, the whole situation over there's a mess. But it's a strange set of allies that you have, like, in terms of the ideals of what the world should look like that you see on the progressive left, and then like the way that the people they're supporting and like the way that culture works. It seems like a strange one, but it's nice to know that there's a consistency, that this kind of philosophical worldview that is still behind the progressive far left today is the same set of views and the same set of allies and the same set of interests as it was. Like, as at least being consistent is good. I like my veins of philosophy to stay consistent throughout history, at least. So that was cool to see. Again, here they're talking about their influences. Like Mao says, in everything, we must always ask the question, why do you think the masses didn't join us? They didn't feel right. It was they didn't feel it was their fight because we didn't know how to mobilize them. I appreciated these moments of collective reflection where we started with the facts of the matter and then took the time to analyze the contradictions in these facts, to understand the failings of our political work, the foundations of Mao's interpretation of the Marxist dialectic. So a pretty strong affiliation with like the lineage of critical theory. And particularly to be aligning yourself with the Maoist interpretation of the Marxist dialectic, which is a Hegelian idea. So you have Mao's interpretation of Marx's interpretation of Hegel. I don't know, man. That's just not a lineage that I would want to, a family lineage of thought that I would want to associate myself with. And then at the end, actually, I misstated at the beginning. I said this was his mother. This is his wife. So at the end of the book, I'm not going to give away totally all of how this plays out and comes down. But at the end of the book, you get Elise, or the author Dominique, here through her work in translation and her realizations of like how cartooning can be like a political thing, like political cartooning, and just the stories that you can tell through cartooning. So you can see here where she's working in an editorial meeting in the comics world, and then here getting to know and falling in love with Tardis himself. The strange thing about this book that I was mentioning at the beginning is there is, and I find this both impressive and strange, but it both like increases and decreases my enjoyment of the book in different ways, is that while I was reading this book, I really felt like the author was writing about, it didn't feel like autobiography, it felt like biography. It didn't feel like someone writing about themselves. There seemed to be like a cold remove to the whole thing, which I think is impressive when you're writing about yourself. But there was something about it also where, like, I don't know, the characters didn't seem like fully imbued with personality in the way I would expect from autobiography or something. But maybe that's like people being careful about writing about themselves. I don't know. There was just a tone in the book that was odd for me, that I was making mental note of throughout, that was going to be like one of my criticisms. And again, I don't mean a negative or a positive. It's just an observation about the book that I was trying to, and I'm still trying to figure out if I think it's good to have this content treated at a remove, or if it would be more engaging to not do that. So it was interesting to turn to this sequence at the end then, and even to see like here, Dominique, or Elise in the story, is asking Tardi to draw the cover for her album, And you see the cover here, and it's very obviously his art from earlier on. It has all the qualities of his art, but it's more realistic. It's not as cartooning yet. It's definitely it's cool because this is what someone who draws like this would have drawn like as an early 20 something year old. That it totally makes sense that this came from that. So that's really 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 cool to see. But yeah, it left me at the end like, huh, this is actually like a husband wife team working on this book, and it had that cold removed to it. So I don't know if it's a negative or positive. I think it's just a thing that is a decision that they made about trying to treat the book from a more reporterly objective remove. And I get why they made that decision. And everything I've seen in any other Tardi books is this is someone who very much knows what they're doing. It was just something that surprised me about it. So yeah, really really cool book. Now as I'm flipping through it and like casually looking at crowds, I'm noticing more faces like the Foucault that I noticed in there. So that's actually something that I didn't notice on the read through, but as I'm talking, looking at it, there might be a lot of like hidden little, like here, I'm pretty sure that's the Foucault. These are probably characters. People are gonna yell at me because those are gonna be the fucking Beatles or something. But yeah, I think there's probably a lot of cool little Easter eggs to be found in the background, especially the more familiar you are with the characters of the time. This is probably a really fascinating and rich book. So Tardi continues to be impressive, and I enjoyed this one quite a bit. House on Fire by Matt Battaglia is a just gorgeous book where Matt's kind of making an emotional response to the years of COVID and wrapping that into a sci-fi dystopian future that really the sci-fi dystopian's backgrounded, and you're focused on the emotional journey of two characters in a really beautiful way. And then that's enhanced by Matt's like really awesome, loose, kind of Paul Popish dry brush work. And then Sean and Matt have worked to get this second kind of orange spot color in there that's going to look really, really beautiful, and has allowed Matt to use his dry brush technique to add tone to the thing too. So with Sean's production technique, this is going to be a gorgeous book with a lot of heart.